The framing of resistive discourse in the Sikh community around religion, brought most fully to the fore in the current militancy, is a phenomenon that must be placed in a broader historical context, to make full sense of it. This contextualizing is exactly what most accounts of Sikh separatism fail to do, which results in making the insistence on religious orthodoxy among Khalistanis look inexplicable in terms other than backwardness, intolerance, and fanaticism. It appears fundamentalist particularly against the backdrop, first, of the state of India, which is explicitly committed to secularism, and second, of the dominant Hindu tradition, which is explicitly committed to tolerance. Why the vehement assertions of orthodoxy in this situation? One wonders. The problem is that neither of these backdrops to Sikh militancy, the Indian secular state and the tolerant Hindu community, is actually what it seems to be at first glance. It is becoming clearer to many observers, for example, that the philosophical tolerance of the Hindu tradition, emphasized by many Western admirers, is not in fact matched by a social or political tolerance for non-Hindu groups. Though there is an extensive literature, emphasizing the recency of the kind of tribalistic Hinduism, expressed in the orange-robed mobs tearing apart the Babri Masjid, in fact a kind of ethnic exclusivism has been a persistent undercurrent in Hindu tradition. Ainsley Embry, in his important Utopias in Conflict, recognizes that this aspect of the Hindu tradition has played a central role in the communal conflicts that have racked the subcontinent. He notes that the philosophical willingness to accept many kinds of truths as meaningful is the source of the mistaken notion of Hindu tolerance, which assumes a live and let live generosity. In fact, a more appropriate explanation of Hindu tolerance would be that in this tradition, various kinds of truths and their accompanying social practices can be encapsulated within a broader Hindu umbrella, as long as there is willingness to accept the premises on which the encapsulation is based. So Hindus are quite ready to claim Sikhs, Buddhists, and Jains as part of their own community. Indeed, there are even those who talk of Hindu Muslims, a phrase that, for Muslims, who do not accept the premises of the overarching framework, is ridiculous, insulting, and sacrilegious. The result is a situation of miscommunication, in which Hindus think they are being generous in welcoming others to the fold, but those others feel they are the objects of a kind of spiritual imperialism. When the Arya Samaj started its campaign of Shuddhi, or purification in Punjab, so that Sikhs who had lapsed from the Hindu fold, and become polluted through their non-caste practices could rejoin the family, it saw itself as extending a welcome to long-lost brothers and sisters. Singh Sabha activists, by contrast, saw it as a high-handed attempt to eradicate a religious and moral tradition that does not consider intercaste interaction as degrading, but as uplifting. They looked at the historical example of Buddhism, which was absorbed into Hinduism in ancient times, and determined that Sikhism would not suffer the same fate. Were India a secular state on the Western model, this aspect of Hindu tradition might not be as important as, in fact, it is. But the conception of secularism on which the Indian state is based, is different from the wall of separation of church and state we usually mean when we use the term. The secular ideal of India is expressed in the motto, Sarvadharma Samhava, let all religions prosper. The government has in fact not stayed out of the business of religion, but attempts to be even-handed in its treatment of various religious groups. The problem is that in numerical terms, the Hindu community clearly dominates, 83%, and top caste Brahmins serve in high government posts utterly out of proportion to their numbers. Thus a definition of even-handedness on the part of the government can oddly reinforce the idea of encapsulation of various minority groups, as described by Embry, the terms of welcome being set by the largely forward caste Hindu government officials. P.C. Upadhyaya prefers to call Indian secularism, majoritarianism, the domination of an avowedly even-handed system by the majority community. It makes the minorities queasy, and the fear that the system could slide into outright Hindu communalism is a real one. When Hindu revivalists today talk about the Hindu Rashtra, the Hindu nation, and make being a Hindu equivalent to being an Indian, those Indians who don't want to be Hindus, find themselves in the position of being potential traitors to India. The entanglement of religion and politics is not, then, something limited to the Sikh community. To ignore the religion-politics axis in the majority community, wrongly places the burden to defend or explain this nexus, on the activist minority alone. When we ask why the Sikhs express religious and political grievances in joint terms, we have to ask at the same time, how it is that religious and political domination are intertwined in the Indian state. Only then can we make some sense of why the political separatism of the Khalistani Sikhs has become tightly linked to the assertion of religious orthodoxy. The fact that rebellion against the Indian state is today fractured into multiple regional and sectarian movements itself points to the success of the system, which refracts discontent into myriad shattered and hence powerless pieces. The complicity of Western academia with the ideology of forward caste Hinduism also interferes with a realistic appraisal of what India is as a civilization, and as a nation-state. In anthropology this bias has been expressed in two major ways: first, in the relativistic understanding of caste as a consensual hierarchy, rather than as a system of exploitation, and second, in the attribution of current communal conflicts to colonial intervention, rather than to the long-term power dynamics of Hindu civilization. These two arenas are linked of course, and amount to a forward caste denial of its own role in perpetuating inequality and conflict. Interestingly, while a whole field of subaltern studies in India has appropriately challenged the harmony and tolerance conception of caste, the progressive scholars who comprise it have also been more interested in dissecting the disruption brought about by colonization than pursuing questions of archaeology and ancient history. But, as Sheldon Pollock notes, domination did not enter India with European colonialism. Quite the contrary, gross asymmetries of power, the systematic exclusion from access to material and non-material resources of large sections of the population, appear to have characterized India in particular times and places, over the last 3 millennia, and have formed the background against which ideological power, intellectual and spiritual resistance, and many forms of physical and psychological violence crystallized. One such crystallization was Sikhism itself, and another is the more tightly condensed crystal of the Khalistani insurgency. When Sant Jarnail Singh Bhindranwala, Sukhdev Singh Babar, Amrik Singh, Subheg Singh, and others started their campaign against the Indian government, it was against a proximate backdrop of unresolved ASR claims, and an increased sense of disillusionment with democratic process, which when it worked, seemed to end up with Sikhs not achieving the representation they thought they needed, and when it didn't work, ended up with the dictatorship known as emergency rule. But it was also against the ultimate backdrop of communal conflict on the subcontinent, which gave Sikhs a historical justification to fear for the future of their religion, in a Hindu-dominated state. These leaders had the entire history of Sikhism to draw on, for models for their resistance, from the lives of the gurus, to guerrilla rebels like Banda Singh Bahadur, from whose movement eventually sprung an empire. The fact that the majority of the people of Punjab, and even the majority of the Sikhs, did not support them in their endeavors, was not a deterrent, but was if anything a potent symbol of just how far the Sikh panth had sunk. After they provoked the wrath of the Indian government in 1984, the panth in fact, rallied round. The Khalistani militancy was born.